The Cincinnati Reds are next on the team preview here at the Row Report from the OK Baseball podcast. Jeff Carr joins the show to talk about the Reds and what to expect in 2023. Welcome into the show, everyone. The Row Report here at the OK Baseball podcast, presented by Slasher Sports. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and we are continuing on with these team previews as we are now a month away from opening day. I'm glad we are finally getting to it. 30 days doesn't seem fast enough, though. We got to get it faster. We got to get it here. Joining me today to talk about the Cincinnati Reds is Jeff Carr. You can find him if you want to hear more about the Reds. You can find him on Locked On Reds podcast, one of the best podcasts out there. I'm not even a Reds fan, and I find myself listening to him and his co-host all the time. Jeff, welcome into the show. It's good to have you here. Welcome back for another year of a season preview of the Cincinnati Reds.
Appreciate the kind words, Christian. Yeah, we are ready to go. Just a month away. Again, it's going to be a fun year. I firmly believe that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the NL Central. We did a Pirates preview earlier, and the Pirates seem to be a fun team this year. Like, they actually spent some free agency money. The Cardinals, what it's going to be without Yadier Molina. The Brewers, I feel like they're like in a make or break year right now. Like Corbin Burns, I'm predicting he might be not a Milwaukee Brewer by the season's end. And then the Cubs did some interesting things. So there's a lot of really fun things in that division. And before we get started and really dig into 2023, and I'm going to definitely get your predictions by the end of this episode, I want to take a step back and look at 2022 with the Cincinnati Reds, especially. Now, they didn't have the best season, 62-100. They were tied for last place in the NL Central. There was a lot of things that went right, a lot of things that were interesting, and a lot of hopeful things, you could say, especially guys that are throwing 100 miles an hour 4 or 5 times more than any other pitcher in the league. But then you also have injuries to big-time players like Joey Votto. Take me back to 2022, obviously someone who covers the Reds all the time. How did that feel, and what did it feel just covering the Reds?
It definitely was a roller coaster year. Almost sounds like too dramatic, but the way that it certainly started on the downslope for sure, going 3-22. But the way that everybody's talked about it coming into camp this year, they were like, man, we were just as shell-shocked as all the fans were with all the different trades and the total teardown that happened last year, because it felt like the Reds were so close in 2021, and then all of a sudden, we're going to hit the reset button and start over and all of that great stuff. So everyone, including the players, took a minute to kind of adjust to it, and that's why the Reds started off so bad. I mean, Phil Castellini's comments aside this offseason, it's always a little bit of a joke whenever a team has a bad April that it's like, they're out of it by May. Well, the Reds were 3-22, the second worst start ever in the history of baseball, and they just never really recovered from it. They had a couple of decent months, I think. In fact, if I remember right, I think they were over 500 in the month of May. But, I mean, when you're 19 games under 500 to begin the month, you got to be pretty darn good to flip that script, and that just wasn't going to happen. But the best thing to come out of last year was, you mentioned it, Hunter Green, also Nick Lodolo, and Graham Ashcraft. The Reds figured out in a year in which they lost 100 games for the second time ever in franchise history, they figured out who their big three is moving forward, and that is something that we can at least grab onto as we head into 2023.
Yeah, gotta love the youth movement that's starting here. Definitely want to get more thoughts on that as we continue on with the show. But let's do the flip side of that youth movement to start off here. And let's talk about the old timer on the squad, Joey Votto, who seems to just be there I can't remember a Cincinnati Reds game where he wasn't a part of the team, if I'm being completely honest. It's just been so long. Today, he just was seen, I'm sure you saw it. I'm sure that's something that is all across your feed, talking about aliens, making predictions, his best prediction. You'll see it on the screen here. It's just a fantastic quote by Joey Votto. I mean, I don't know where he gets this stuff. I know he has some crazy TikToks, and it's like he found social media in his midlife crisis, and now he's just having an absolute ball with it. But regardless, I love it. What he does to the game and helps it grow. It's fantastic. But what I'm more worried about here, and more concerned, I think you should say, is his health. Obviously, it was a big issue last season. He got that needed surgery this offseason. How do you think he's going to contribute to the team this year moving forward in 2023? Do you think it's going to be more pushed towards that mentorship role to this youth movement, or are we going to see some actual performance from this guy?
Um, it's interesting. And before, so I've kind of thought about him being like a comeback player of the year candidate throughout this offseason. And before I get into why, to get back to the alien comment, like it's the most Joey Votto thing ever to come up with, hey, aliens are going to come down to Earth. And by the way, we're going to be friends with them. We're not going to fight them. This isn't going to be a world war, world at war or something like that, or Independence Day situation. He's like, now we're going to be friends with them. The Reds are going to win the World Series, and then I'm going to fly home with them to their planet, and no one's ever going to see me again. It's like,
yeah, you know what? He did say that. It makes you wonder, was that his weird way of saying that this might be his last year in the MLB?
It could be. And last year, he was asked about it during the Field of Dreams game whenever he was mic'd up, and he pushed back. In fact, he pushed back emphatically, saying, I believe I have a couple of years left. I wonder if the surgery changed his mind a little bit. He fought through a torn rotator cuff for 7 years. He had it since 2015, is what he said, initially when the injury took place. And they said that you can manage it or you can have surgery on it now. And he just kept managing it. And while you look back during that time frame, in 2019 and 2020 were kind of massive struggles for him, he still played super well. He was like one vote away from beating Giancarlo Stanton out in 2017 for the NL MVP. And then 2021, he had that power resurgence. And even still last season on one arm, basically, he had 11 home runs. Like, there's something about the way that Joey Votto plays the game, and especially hits, that he just gets it. And he's been able to maybe not completely stave off father time because some of his game has regressed, but he has definitely pushed it back and pushed it back. Now, I also saw something that was interesting today on Fangraphs. Zips kind of had its projection system working specifically on Joey Votto and all the different percentiles and what a year might look for him. And basically what I've been saying literally falls under like the 99th percentile. So maybe I'm not necessarily as close as I thought to saying, comeback player of the year. That might not necessarily be exactly what happens for him, but even the 95th percentile still had him hitting about 27 home runs and batting 290 and things like that. That would be absolutely phenomenal. But if you tell me right now, we're going to see a season where he hits 20 bombs. He's got a batting average of about 260, maybe gets on base about 33% of the time, 34% of the time. I'm going to take that because I feel like the Reds lineup, especially with one of the new additions and with Jonathan India and Tyler Stevenson getting healthy and bouncing back, this lineup's going to be a lot better than it was last year, though I do recognize that that's a low bar to beat.
Yeah, that's fair. And he did also mention, I know obviously he put the aliens on there, but he did also say at the beginning of that comment that the Reds would start the season 12-2. So sounds like a way, compared to last year, I'll take that as well too. You mentioned Jonathan India, and I'm glad you did bring him up because what a breakout year he had in 2021. Obviously, NL Rookie of the Year. He was so fun to watch. I remember watching him in college and then stepping up and doing what he did in Cincinnati. Now, what is your thoughts on him being able to resurrect his basically come into his career? He really lost all of last year with the injuries he had, Tyler Stevenson, as well as you mentioned. 2023 could be a nice resurgence for Cincinnati with getting Votto back, Stevenson, and Jonathan India.
Everybody's favorite spring training moniker, right? He came in the best shape of his life. Well, they didn't say that, but they did say that he cut 10 pounds and added 3 miles an hour to his sprint speed. That sounds like as close to best shape of your life as you can get. So I'm really happy that those were the initial reports. And then he also came into camp with the mindset of making himself a leader of the ball club. And he understands. He was here whenever the Reds were built and ready to go in 2021. He made friends with Nick Castellanos. He was friends with Jesse Winker. He knew those guys. And then he gets to see them traded off unceremoniously. Or in the case of Nick Castellanos, sent his way on free agency and the Reds never calling him. So that was kind of weird. But he goes through all of this and he's just like, trying to figure out a ton of stuff. And then, oh, by the way, he deals with a bunch of injuries last year. So while he is trying to process the business of the game, the reality of the physicality of the game smacks him in the face because he said last year he came into camp bulked up and ready to hit some dingers. And that's just not who he is. He is a gritty, fast player that plays all out every single play. And if you're going to add some muscle and bulk up a little bit, that's going to be hard to do. So he hurt himself quite a bit trying to do that. He had, a couple of hamstring problems early on in the season. And then there was that very publicized hit by pitch in the Field of Dreams game that he couldn't even fly home with the team. They had to drive him home because they were afraid he had something called compartment syndrome, which I had never heard of until this injury. And, like they said that he was close, and I don't know how close because the reports don't say this. And well, I'm not a doctor and neither are the beat writers, but they said that he was close to losing his leg. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, and then he was back in the lineup 3 days later. It's like, this dude is all grit and wants to go super hard. And I think he realized that. And there was a lot of, quotes from him talking about a renaissance this offseason and understanding himself. And so I'm very excited to see how he comes into this season, because we've already seen in spring training, he's gotten on base via a single. He had a steal of third. He didn't steal a lot of bags last year. In fact, the Reds as a whole didn't steal a lot of bags last year. Guy who led the team in steals was Nick Senzel, and we've widely considered the 2022 season for Nick Senzel a failure, but he had 8 steals, which led the entire team, which was so pathetic to say. So to see that, to see him add some team speed and to be him a leader for this ball club, I think we could see a totally different feel, not only to him, but to the rest of this team. And that's why I think that renaissance for him this offseason was so important. And I'm so pumped to see the bounce back this year.
Seeing India and Stevenson both go into their age 27 season this year, that's usually one of those capstone years for baseball players. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Jonathan India could do. I'd love to see him get back to 2021 performance, because that was a blast watching him. And I think that was my biggest confusion with Cincinnati when they decided to go to the nuts and bolts, is knowing you had a guy like Jonathan India and then you decided to step away from that push. So I think that was my biggest concern, my biggest question mark all of last season. I'd love to see what happens if they can keep building around that guy, because he's still young enough to do that. He really is. And I'm looking forward to it. You got a couple of veterans as well on your team. Will Myers comes over. He had a great run in San Diego for a long time. Some people are trying to say that this might be a great flip. However, he seems like a pretty good spot in Cincinnati. It seems like it fits quite well. What do you think about Will Myers?
I do like him. I mean, something that I just kind of had a wild hair about me, and I kind of compared career-wise Will Myers and Nick Castellanos. Reds fans, obviously, we have a very large appreciation for what Nick Castellanos did in 2021. That was a career year for him in so many different ways. He hit more homers than he's ever had in one season. He had the best batting average he ever had in one season. It was an amazing year. Career-wise, Nick Castellanos and Will Myers are very similar. Nick Castellanos has like a handful more homers and maybe like a dozen more RBIs, and that's it. Everything else is pretty much, neck and neck. And so people look at this and they say, Will Myers, should we really be that excited about him? Yeah, I think so. This dude's going to come into Great American Ballpark, and he has no platoon splits. We're not talking about a guy who can't hit lefties or can't hit righties. He hits them both equally well. And that feels like something that the Reds haven't had, at least coming up through their system and looking at the future. You see these guys and you're like, well, they really got right-handed pitching down, but if a lefty's on the mound, we got to sub him out, because can't see anything, can't hit anything, is not worth anything with a lefty on the mound. That's not the way with Will Myers. And so I'm looking for him to be kind of a stabilizing force, both, from the non-platoon split and then also, like you mentioned, the veteran side of things for a team that's going to be super young. I mean, this is a year where they need to figure out who fills out the core of this team for the future. So the mantra should be to let the kids play. But if you can have one or two guys like a Will Myers on the roster, then the young guys will benefit from that, especially when you look at the new guy that they got from the Cleveland Guardians and Will Benson, who has oodles of talent and just looks like he is a athletic stud who's about to be like Adam Dunn 2.0. Like Adam Dunn, who can run and field, something that Adam Dunn couldn't do, but he could hit the ball a country mile. If you can kind of have a positive influence on him with Will Myers, then that will pay for itself even more so than the production he can give you on the box score.
I wonder, even when it's cold in April and March, if Will Myers will wear batting gloves. That's another thing that I'm
Yeah.
really curious about because he doesn't wear batting gloves. Spring training is obviously in the thick of it. Before we get to the arms and start talking about the rotation, what's the position battle that you're really paying attention to this spring that you think is like the key battle for the Reds this year?
Man, that's a tough. There's so many. I mean, you're looking at the starting pitcher battle. That's probably where the most importance is had. There's at least 3 spots, maybe 4 spots in the bullpen. What does shortstop look like? Because I don't necessarily know that the Reds should just hand the keys back to Jose Barrero right away. And then also, who fills out this outfield? I mean, we've got Will Myers. I'm pretty confident Will Benson's going to be one of those guys, and most likely, if not the everyday center fielder, the most of the days center fielder.
Okay.
But then you look at where Nick Senzel fits in all of that. What's left field look like? Because Jake Fraley is that guy that can't hit left-handed pitching, but can kill right-handed pitching. So who platoons with him in left field? There's so much going on there, but the pitching is the most important part because the Reds have 1 through 3 figured out. I mean, it's Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, Graham Ashcraft. There's no argument there. Who 4 and 5 is a completely different story because we have no idea who is. I can tell you who I think are the favorites, and the Reds might have a completely different 2 guys. Like I think it's Luke Weaver, and I think it's Brandon Williamson. And Luke Weaver is a guy that I've kind of had to talk myself into because the Royals didn't see him as a starter last year. And if the Royals didn't see him as a starter, why should anyone see him as a starter? But he has reportedly been working on a 4-pitch mix. That's a 4-seamer, a cut fastball, a changeup, and some kind of curveball. It's either a curve or a slow slider or something like that. It's
I gotta ask. Oh, sorry. Keep
oh
going.
yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, I thought you were done. You were clearing your throat. I do that all the time, but I got to ask, what do you think about Connor Overton? I know he had some injuries. I see. I follow guys like Overton. I graduated from Old Dominion, so he's someone that's always on my radar. So, what's your thoughts about him? I know some people think he can get up to that 100-inning mark. Is he going to be a starter again, a bullpen piece? I know injuries were a big concern last year, though.
Honestly, Connor Overton or Luke Weaver, I think it's like 6 one, half dozen the other. And it's because I don't know that much about Connor Overton. I think I know what I know about Luke Weaver, but there are some nice, spring training puff pieces that have been written about Luke Weaver that are kind of clouding my mind a little bit. But Connor Overton got the chance last year to throw 6 starts. And those 6 starts came at a time when the Reds were just limping through the month of April and trying to get to May and trying to put all of that nastiness of the horrible start behind them. They were getting no consistent starting pitching. Hunter Green was really having trouble because it seemed like he could only throw his fastball, and everybody knew that, and they were clobbering him. Nick Lodolo was still kind of coming back from injury. Graham Ashcraft wasn't a thing yet, so the pitching staff was just, oh my gosh, who are we throwing out there every 5th day? And here comes Connor Overton, just a stabilizing force, and it's not about sexy stuff. He doesn't have like impressive numbers on his fastball when you're talking about miles per hour. The spin rate's not going to blow you out of the water or anything like that. He just commands it. He just puts it where he needs to go in the strike zone. He doesn't walk a ton of guys. And that in and of itself could be the stabilizing force that the Reds need there in that 4th or 5th spot. So I kind of think that, if you were to tell me, here's a Jeff, it's gonna be Connor Overton over Luke Weaver, I don't know that I could really argue too much about that because I think Connor Overton has a pretty solid argument to at least break camp as a starting pitcher with this team.
I would just love to keep him stay healthy. Honestly, that's just
Yeah.
where I would love to see it. But you talk about this big 3, and that's just a great feeling to have for this rotation, especially when you're talking about the oldest guy as Lodolo, who is 25 years old, might hit 26 by the time the season's over. I don't think his birthday's there, so I think this is going to be his full 25-year season. But then you got Hunter Green, who's going to be in year 24, Ashcraft, who's 25. I mean, this is just the first start of the youth movement. And the youth movement seems to be in full swing here in Cincinnati, especially after the trade deadline last year with the big trades from Luis Castillo going over to Seattle, brought in some big-time prospects, really helped that farm system out. However, though, it seems like, unless I'm talking to you, Jeff, because I feel like you get me all pumped up about the Reds in this division, but it seems like the Reds seem to get a negative light shined on them by national media, especially based on what the owners' comments were last season, and they love sending putting the pictures on ESPN or talking baseball, whatever those big time media things are of the Reds fans wearing the paper bag hats, whatever the case may be. But you're the one that covers the Reds every single day, almost nearly every single day, all season long, all year long, I should say. So I'm more curious what you have to say. How do you believe that they are heading in the right direction?
I do think they're heading in the right direction, and it's because I see signs. I don't necessarily know, and nobody's come out and said this, but I see signs that ownership has taken their hands off the wheel a little bit. There have been multiple reports in the past, whether you're talking about a possible Billy Hamilton trade. There were multiple Billy Hamilton trades back whenever the Reds were trying to rebuild the first time in 2015, and they were trying to trade Billy Hamilton, and the owner was just like, no. That's one of my favorite players. He's a fan favorite. We can't get rid of him. That's just silly. We're not going to do it. And then he just kept getting worse, and then there was no trade value, and then he was unceremoniously just let go because he couldn't play very well. There's been lots of examples of that where the ownership kind of steps in and says, nope, you're not doing that. You're doing this. And then the front office has to pivot, and then the entire organization just kind of looks silly. But I feel like over the last year and a half, and I'm not even thinking it's like 2 years, I think probably since about May of last year, they took their hands off the wheel and they let Nick Krall drive, because Nick Krall did the thing last year where he added so much talent. And I think a world in which ownership is meddling in the Reds, they don't trade Luis Castillo. The Luis Castillo is still here, or became a free agent, and the Reds get a compensation draft pick for him when he goes and he signs somewhere else. So I see the path forward for this team, and the fact that they're letting the baseball. And when it comes to like the negative comments and the things that Phil Castellini says, it's like when I talk to people about going to see a movie that they read the book about. They're two different things. There's the book and there's the movie. There's the ownership of a team and there's the team. Nobody roots for the owner. Nobody says, I'm a Reds fan because I love the ownership. Nobody, at least I don't know too many Cowboys fans, but I'm pretty sure no Cowboys fan out there is just like, I root for the Cowboys because I love Jerry Jones. I don't think anybody's saying that. They love the players. They love the coaches. They love, and sometimes not the coaches, but they love the players, and they love what they do on the field, and they want them to win. And nobody should have this bad feeling about them. It's just like, well, if I root for the Reds to win and they win, then Phil Castellini prospers and I don't like him. Well, then you are going to drive yourself crazy, because there is no sports fan in this world that roots for their team because of their owner. They root for their team because of their players. I root for the Reds because of Joey Votto, and because I grew up being a Reds fan, but I love Joey Votto. I root for the Reds because of Hunter Green, because of Nick Lodolo, because of Alexis Diaz, and I can't wait to see what kind of intro music he has this year, and because of the young guys that are coming up, like or going to get a full opportunity this year, like Spencer Steer or Ellie De La Cruz coming up and going to just set the world on fire. Like it's people who allow an owner like Phil Castellini and the goofball things that he says to affect their fandom that I feel bad for, because I can separate those things, and I wish everybody else could too.
You make me want to run through a brick wall, man. I'll tell you what, that's awesome. Get me all pumped up. No, but that perfectly said. That's why I wanted to get that take from you. And, because you see that, you just see it happen so much. If you're not actually paying attention to a Reds website or a Reds style podcast, they're always seeing a negative light. And I just don't think that's fair, because I think there's so much storylines to cover, and we're covering it right here. Exactly. Because of this youth movement. Now, this is probably the first wave of the new rebuild, if you will, that we're seeing with Lodolo, with Green. There's definitely a lot more, especially since they just received a whole bunch after that trade deadline last season. The farm system definitely jumped up in MLB pipeline. What are a couple prospects that you are looking forward to paying attention to this year? I'm really trying to push towards and encourage people to pay attention to minor league baseball more this year, especially since MLB TV is giving the minor league package for free included this season, which I think is fantastic. So what are a couple prospects that maybe might make their MLB debut this year, or some you just say you got to pay attention to in the Red system?
We've gotten the chance to see him in a couple of spring training games so far, but the number one guy who isn't named Ellie De La Cruz, because that's the most obvious answer, is Christian Encarnacion Strand. Christian Encarnacion Strand, or CES, as people who don't like to say lots of syllables all at once call him, is an absolutely amazing hitter. He has a minor league batting average throughout all levels for his career of over 300, but he also has power. He is a guy that and we like to joke about this around Cincinnati, but Great American Ballpark, we have the tundra that's in way back center field. It's behind the like riverboat party deck and all this other stuff. But if you're sitting there in the stadium, you can see it, and there's always that wonder of like, wonder if a player could get a hold of one and hit that tundra. There's only a couple of people that could ever do it, Adam Dunn being the first guy that I think of. But Christian Encarnacion Strand is one of those guys. He's got so much power that he can just absolutely drive the ball. And from reports are he can do it to all fields. So he's a very good hit tool. And defensively, he's not a liability. Nobody says that he's a good defender, but I think there's been some folks that go a little bit crazy on how bad of a defender he can be. I don't think he's bad. I think he's just kind of, a little bit below average, but he does have a decent arm. So he could play at third base if that's where they're looking. He's most likely the heir apparent to Joey Votto at first base because he's got the power to actually profile as a first baseman, but he is the first guy that I'm looking toward. And then the other guy is he's a guy who I don't necessarily know has as much of a shot to break camp with the rotation, but I think we should see him pitching at some point this year in Cincinnati, and that's Andrew Abbott. Andrew Abbott has, not necessarily in the same vein, but kind of like Graham Ashcraft, rose through the ranks and rose through the prospect rankings for the Reds farm system from basically not really sure who this guy is to one of the best pitchers and one of the guys that people are kind of looking towards here in the next year or two. He's not the same kind of pitcher as Green or Lodolo or Ashcraft because he doesn't have a pitch that is 100 miles an hour or 98 miles an hour. He kind of sits 93 to 95 with his fastball, but like Connor Overton has very good command and can move them all over the zone and kind of mess with hitters that way. Still has a decent strikeout rate despite not having the stuff that really is off the charts. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what he can do. And as far as the guys, and this is a guy that's just on my mind, partially because Dayton is so close to Cincinnati. He's not going to make the major leagues this year, but he's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And it's Chase Petty, the guy that the Reds got from the Minnesota Twins for Sonny Gray. He's going to be in high A Dayton to start the year. And all reports are, he was a kid that was throwing 100 in high school, but he's learned how to pitch at 85%. That's like the biggest question mark around the Reds organization over the last few years is that it felt like everybody who was coming up, every pitch they threw was at like 110%. And you're like, how long can this guy pitch not only in this game, but how long of a career can he have if he's just going 110% with every pitch that he throws? But all reports are from Chase Petty that he's learned how to dial it back and still be effective and still get people out. And that in and of itself is worth watching to see, like, okay, what does the future of Reds pitching development look like? Chase Petty is at the top of that list.
Exciting. That's exciting stuff. If somebody has never heard of Cincinnati Reds and what they do on opening day, take me through that real quick, the process. It's one of the most magical things. I think it's the best opening day in all of baseball. What's your thoughts on that?
There was, I think it was a meme. Yeah, it was not a GIF. It was a meme that I once saw that said that few places in the world make a day feel more important than Christmas Day than the Reds make opening day feel for the city of Cincinnati. There's a parade. And by parade, I mean they start uptown and they come downtown. It's not like, okay, we're going to cover like 3 blocks and it's going to be cute. Every company in the city of Cincinnati is in this thing, whether you're media, whether you're Kroger, or whether you're, retail, whatever. Like, they're all in it. I was once in the parade myself when I worked for the bank or worked for a local bank, and we had a float. Like, if banks got floats, everybody's got floats. So this parade's a big deal. Then you've got all the stuff that happens down at the banks, and the banks is kind of the area around Great American Ballpark. It has a DORA, designated outdoor refreshment area. It's got a bunch of different bars and restaurants and little shops and things like that that people can go to. Lots of outdoor space to sit and chill. So especially if we're not talking about an opening day like we had in 2021 where it was 30 degrees outside, and it's more like 2019 where it was like 65 and sunny. That's what we're hoping for here in Cincinnati. Then everything is enjoyable, and you can walk across a bridge, and right there across the river in Covington, Kentucky is some nice places that have lots of events. You've got live shows from every radio show that you can think of in the city of Cincinnati at bars all around the banks and all around the river. And then you've got just the festivities that lead up to the game and all of the different stuff. Like, there are so many people that go down there to the game, and obviously they sell it out every year, but there's even more people that are just there to be around other Reds fans. And it's got this feel, and people talk about, especially with the NFL, how fans come down to the park and tailgate, but they don't even have tickets. They just want to be down there and tailgate and be around it. This is the one day a year that a baseball game feels like a football game, because you've got everyone wearing red. They're wearing their favorite jerseys from years past. I mean, it's always fun to see all the different names, because obviously you get like the Big Red Machine. You'll get guys like Eric Davis and players like that who are on the 1990 World Series team. But then maybe you can find like an obscure one, like a DT Cromer jersey, or maybe like a Jason LaRue jersey or something like that. So it's so much fun. And everyone feels like they are a just diehard Reds fan for one day a year around Great American Ballpark. And it's absolutely something that I never want to miss.
Yeah, I love the stories when I hear about opening day. It's definitely on my bucket list. I want to make sure I get to at least a Cincinnati Reds opening day one time, hopefully in the next few years, because I think that's just one of the coolest just festivities. Opening day it should be a national holiday. So I'm glad that Cincinnati treats it that way. All right, let's get into these predictions to wrap this show up. In 2022, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, 62-100, Jeff, tied for last place with the Pirates, 31 games behind the Cardinals for the division win. 62 wins. They did have that 100 loss. They had the triple digits there. Obviously, that's something that they try to avoid. As you mentioned, it's the second time in franchise history they got to that mark. Is it going to happen again in 2023? 62 wins, you think it's over? And then are they going to get out of the basement in the NL Central? Can you see that happening? What's your predictions for this season?
I definitely think they win more games this year. FanDuel has their over-under at 65.5. I'm still smashing the over on that. I've told anybody that wants to listen that they're going to win 75 games. And it's hilarious that is just far too much optimism for a Cincinnati Reds fan. But there's a lot of folks that think that that's too much optimism. That's just where we are around here sometimes. But the young core that they are going to build this year is going to be so exciting and so much fun to watch, that they're going to be much better than they were last year. As far as climbing out of the cellar, I have also gone on record to say that the NL Central, while it's not as talented as any other division in Major League Baseball, is going to be very fun to watch, because I think that the Cardinals win it with a key asterisk as long as Paul Goldschmidt stays healthy. You take Paul Goldschmidt out of that lineup, they are very susceptible. And I don't really like their pitching staff. I think that Ryan Helsley is great in the bullpen, and I think that they've got an okay starting rotation, but that's not a starting rotation that I'm worried about come playoff time. So I think that if you remove the one key piece that is the NL MVP and Paul Goldschmidt, then that entire team just kind of unravels a little bit. But I still think they win. And then I think the second through last place teams will all be separated by something like 5 games at the end of the year. And I think that the turmoil that the Milwaukee Brewers have created surrounding Corbin Burns, which makes no sense to me whatsoever, but
Agreed.
that is going to have a little bit of a ripple effect through their organization. I think that they take a step back this year. I don't think they're going to be division winners. And I think that the Pittsburgh Pirates take a measurable step forward, because they are where I want the Reds to be in a year. I think they can take that leap and be, a sneaky wild card team with a lot of the young guys and a lot of the veterans that they've brought in to their team. And then the Cubs are doing a weird thing where they try to build a contender like 2 pieces at a time each year. They brought in a couple of interesting starting pitchers last year. They brought in a couple of bats this year. Not necessarily sure that they have filled all the holes they need to, but they're still going to be fun to watch. I can see it being Cardinals, Cubs, Brewers, Pirates, Reds. And I don't necessarily know that the Reds finishing last is as bad as it was last year, because I think they're going to be close to who is ahead of them in the NL Central standings.
Well, it'd be nice to see no NL Central teams not hit that 100 loss mark. And the way it sounds, with 75 wins is the last place Reds team, that's going to be not even close. I love it. Fantastic. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Route Report here at the OK Baseball Podcast, covering the Cincinnati Reds for the 2023 season. Please let everyone know where they can find you, what kind of things you have coming up. The mic is yours, my friend. As always, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you for having me, Christian. You can follow the Locked On Reds podcast on every podcasting platform, including on YouTube. Just search Locked On Reds. Make sure you subscribe and you follow there. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs, as it says right here. Or you can follow my co-host, Stephen Offenbaker, at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs. And you can follow the show at Locked On Reds.
Fantastic. All that stuff will be in the show notes below, so be sure to click that and give them a follow. As I said, I'm not even a Reds fan, but I love listening to those guys. They have fantastic overview of the Cincinnati Reds and all of baseball. If you haven't figured that out after listening to this show, definitely give them more of a listen. That's going to wrap it up here for this episode of the Red Report here at the OK Baseball Podcast. We'll be back here with more as team previews are flying in. We are getting to, we are at almost 10. We're almost there, right? We're about a third of the way through. So we'll get there before opening day. But until then, we'll see you back here with another episode of OBP. Take care.